in the St. Louis school and the New York school and in New London. In New London, that's when he started to develop other appliances.
So in 1911, Oppenheim came to the United States for the first time, took Engel's course, and then following that meeting began to correspond quite frequently. And again, it was very interesting to hear Engel's words of affection for him, especially as the years went on. And Engel and Mrs. Engel began to refer to themselves very early on as Oppenheim's grandparents. And so all the letters were signed, Großvater or Großvater, Großmutter or Großeltern, the German words for grandparents.
He set up a school in New London. He had an office there, not to treat patients, but to do his writing. And he set up a school that had at least one session a year. And for 3 years, he was training orthodontists. Apparently, that wore on him a little bit, and his yen for change bore down, and he decided he was going to go west.
Pasadena. He and Anna had vacationed in California just prior to their move, and I suspect they liked it so much, they liked the weather in California so much that they decided that they would move there. And so I think that was the motivation, was the weather. They wanted to avoid those harsh New England winters, so they went to Pasadena and bought a home at 1025 North Madison.
He really had a rebirth when he moved to California. I think the weather suited him, whether it physically or emotionally made him healthier. It seemed to sure suit his style at the time, and he would go on and talk about the Sunday drives through the hills and the valleys and driving to San Francisco and how beautiful it was and how the sun was shining and the flowers and the nice car that he had and the chauffeur who was driving, and he just loved California, loved the lifestyle. Felt he had a different type of student out here for whatever reason.
He had an architect, a very famous architect, draw plans for the Edward H. Engel house. He never followed through with those plans and ultimately bought a craftsman-style house in Pasadena and settled in, he thought, to a quiet life of gardening. He had a big yard and garden next to him, had a lot of land. But this respite of getting back to the land and to his writings and having time his own was short-lived because his fame followed him. People soon wanted him on the West Coast to share his great store of knowledge. And one man who happened to graduate from Pennsylvania College of Dental Surgery, who was settled in Southern California and happened to have the same last name, Engel, James Engel, came to him and said, "Look, we would love to help you set up a building where you can dedicate yourself to teaching orthodontics. And we would be happy to underwrite this. We would be happy to help get a charter from California for the Engel College of Orthodontia." So Engel could not refuse this, and indeed, within a few years, a building arose where once there was a pumpkin patch, and it became the Engel College of Orthodontia. And in this building devoted to orthodontic training, Engel resumed the course that he had stopped in 1911 and trained another few classes of able-bodied women and men in orthodontia. And these people came from mostly the West and from Japan and Australia.
You know, he felt very strongly about many things. He felt very strongly about some of the orthodontic schools that were going on in the East with larger numbers of students. Engel evidently in Pasadena only took 3 students at a time and did not charge for his instruction. And he was not cordial in the things that he had to say about some of the schools that were going on in the East with large numbers of students and students paying what he felt was exorbitant tuition of $500 or $700 for their course of study. And so he was very, very negative about anyone that was participating in that sort of educational endeavor at all, even lecturing in one of those courses.
Engel had this way that laid everything on the table. One of the signs that he had prominently posted in his Pasadena school was, "If you think you can't do it, you probably can't." And he reminded his students that they have to do the soldering, they have to do the wire bending until their knuckles were bare. And I think with this learning process, whether it's 6 weeks or 3 months, really made a tremendous impact on all of his students' lives from then on. And they couldn't let the old man down when they went back home.
The Engel College in Pasadena at 550 Jackson Street was in existence. They had classes for 5 years. And then Engel closed the school because of his poor health. And that was the year that Charlie Tweed and Glenn Terwilliger and Ken Terwilliger from Northern California and Curran from Indianapolis, that's the year that they were accepted, and their training only consisted of about 2 or 3 weeks, and then Engel closed the school. That's when George Hahn took over and finished Glenn Terwilliger's training and Charlie Tweed's training.
I think Dr. Engel was very disappointed that he could not identify someone to continue the college, especially since the facility had only been built a few years before. I believe 1923, I think the college was chartered, and it closed in 1927. And again, in his letters, he does refer to wishing that Alan Brody, for example, would take it over, but Alan Brody, went on to become the chairman at the University of Illinois and produced one of the greatest orthodontic programs in the history of our specialty, and so we sure can't fault Alan Brody. He also, was looking at Spencer Atkinson. I don't know whether there ended up being a falling out between Dr. Atkinson and Dr. Engel over a new appliance that Atkinson was developing, and so Atkinson did not take it over either, but instead became the chairman of the orthodontic department at the University of Southern California. So in a way, I think maybe he saw that the writing was on the wall, and that orthodontics, the education of orthodontists was not going to go in the direction that he wanted, but was going to occur under the auspices of the university as a specialty of dentistry.
The graduates of the Engel School were very indebted to their mentor and indebted to what he was doing in promoting orthodontia as a separate and special division of dentistry. And in 1922, when he was in Pasadena, the Edward H. Engel Society of Orthodontists was formed by some of his graduates, earlier graduates who were living in California. And they had meetings every year, and papers were presented and discussed. It was a format that persists today in the Edward H. Engel Society of Orthodontists. And the discussions were very lucid. And of course, Edward Engel was present, and he would enter into the discussions as well. And he was very frank. And we have transcripts of those meetings. And after his death in 1930, there was a meeting of his graduates at the Lakeshore athletic club in Chicago.
And the Edgewise appliance was being developed there at the school between 1924 and 1926. And it was first announced by Angle at the Claremont Hotel in Berkeley, California, and then enlarged upon at the next meeting at the college in Pasadena. That's what he spent his time doing, refining the Edgewise appliance between 1926 and 1930 when he died. In fact, the night he died, he had just finished working on the Edgewise appliance. He and his wife Anna had taken an apartment in Santa Monica, and he'd spent the day working on it and told her that he couldn't improve it further, that it was the best that he could produce. The Angle Society just died when he died because he was the honorary president and he ran it with complete authority. It was his society, plain and simple. When he passed away, his followers, George Hahn and Brody and Tweed and all, decided that they wanted to perpetuate his principles of his philosophy of treatment and his personal principles of integrity and professionalism.
And it was decided to reorganize the Edward H. Angle Society of Orthodontia into a society that not only would members of his course, graduates of his course, be members, but anyone who holds to the same kinds of ideals to advance and contribute to orthodontics.
History is in the eyes of the beholder, and so often there's always probably some bias. So I think when we interpret, we have to first know from where the interpretation comes. And secondly, when you go back in history, different times do color things. Those days, things were much more black and white in the sense that there wasn't these gradations of thinking, and you were either you were or you weren't. You belonged or you didn't, and you were an outcast. So we have to be careful sometimes that we extrapolate from something earlier. History is important. We learn so much from history. We make so many mistakes over again, but it's not only the times, but the people and the way they reacted.
And it's very hard with the current historical sense of presentism to often put ourselves in the mindset of the time. That's why I think Angle's been deconstructed. He's been deconstructed to seem like a mean, biased old fella, or curmudgeon. And I think that's wrong. I think we're putting him down much too much. He deserves much more credit. He was indeed a man of his times. In many senses, he was a 19th century man who lived 30 years into the 20th century. Didn't change an iota. But that doesn't make him mean or bad. He was a brilliant guy who was just following the rules and expressing himself to the extent that educated people express themselves.
He had a number of men who were really gifted and talented, who were disciples of his, who became giants in their own right, is a good indication of his legacy, because today there must be thousands of us who owe our heritage to Dr. Angle.
Through chance, here we have the leader, the founder of orthodontics, the father of our specialty, who happened to bounce from the Midwest to the East and then the West, covering the entire continent, and in the process spread the seeds of orthodontic thinking, of modern orthodontic thinking throughout the world. And that's why so many orthodontic organizations owe their beginnings to Edward Angle's thinking, enthusiasm, and initiative.